Hello and welcome to Geopolitical Cousins. I am your distantly related cousin, editor Jacob. Today we've got a two-parter, so make sure you stick around after the first hour and 3 minutes, because the first hour features Kamran Bokhari discussing everything that's happening in Iran with the boys. The second part is further analysis on Kamran's takes from Jacob and Marco. That's all I've got. Happy New Year. It has been a ridiculously packed New Year. We are loading up tons of really cool content for you. If you haven't checked out the YouTube, go ahead and do it. That's all I got.
All right. We've had cousin Matt on the podcast a few times. Now we've got cousin Kamran joining the show. Kamran, thank you for joining Marco and me as we talk about what the heck's going on in the world.
No, it's good to be part of the family again.
Kamran, I don't know if you know this, but this was a joke often in the Stratfor writers' room. There was a period in history that lasted for over 10 years where if you Google searched the apex of the Iranian Leviathan, the only search result that came up was an article that you wrote for Stratfor back around 2008, 2009. Who better to come on the podcast and talk to us about what the heck is going on in Iran? We're recording Thursday, January 15th. It's 11:08 a.m. Central Time. We will push this out tomorrow. So unless something crazy happens in the next 24 hours, we're pretty current. But Kamran, Marco and I talk about Iran, but you are the real expert on Iran. You're not going to find somebody who knows more about Iran than you in the room. So why don't you just lead off and talk to us about what you think is going on with Iran, and take it from whatever perspective you want. You want to talk about the protests? You want to talk about the supreme leader? You want to talk about what President Trump is doing? I'm sure you will find the course that we can chart there.
Well, thanks, Jacob. It's good to be with Marco again. Look, I want to start by saying I think the world is stuck in a binary, whether some people say, the regime will survive like it has. Others are saying collapse is nigh. And I'm saying that binary perspective is misleading. I think we're looking at long-term decay or longer-term decay of this edifice, this Leviathan, and it was built over 45 years. And it's not going to collapse all of a sudden. This is going to be a painful, evolution. It's something I wrote about in my April 2024 forecast report that the New Lines Institute published on evolutionary regime change, which has been accelerated by the war with Israel, and I mean the war in the region, and then the war that came home for the Iranians last June, and now by this protest. And so we are looking at a situation where there's status quo cannot hold. It cannot endure. Something's got to give. And that something giving will exacerbate matters. So in other words, Iran doesn't get to the other side of whatever is happening right now easily, or even, neatly. I think we're looking at a very messy process, and things can go in multiple directions. The center of gravity for me is what happens between the regular armed forces that now have a considerable influence within the political and policy decision-making circles and the IRGC. If these two forces cannot come to terms with each other, then the country takes a certain direction. If these guys come together and the system as a whole becomes a bit more pragmatic, and these are huge assumptions that, there are lots of ifs built into this. So then the country goes into another set of directions. So that's where I am right now. Suffice to say that the regime is, the regime can't continue as it has. So, again, something has to change. And we can talk about some of those things that can change and what can lead from that. But I'll stop right there.
Kamran, where do you want to take it? I'm sorry, not Kamran. Look at me. I'm only on my first cup of coffee. I'm a little bit late today. Marco, where do you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So first of all, it's such a pleasure to be with Kamran again. So just a little bit of background. All three of us worked at Stratfor, and when I joined Stratfor, Kamran was a veteran. So I definitely looked up to you and your analysis and your work ethic. And you and I are veterans of a lot of different things, of a lot of different moments. I worked at Stratfor. It was my first job outside of academia, and I worked there from 2007 to 2011. And so I remember on my way out, of course, 2011, end of 2010, 2011, Arab Spring, and if you remember Arab Spring, I mean, those revolutions happened all at once. It seemed like there could be some compromise or this or that, but then the extraordinary happened in days. So to push you a little bit on this, you're saying the binary is not the binary is too simplified. Either perseverance or total collapse. But when do regimes die a slow death? Don't they die a violent, sudden, quick death? And we're all scrambling to figure out who's going to lead the country. I mean, that was my experience in 2011. Other than Syria, Syria is the one regime that just kept surviving for a much longer, and maybe that is the example that you would go to, as a counter to the binary one.
Great question. Yeah, and yes, we've shared a lot of moments together. I was at Stratfor from 03 to 15, so a bit before you and stayed for a bit longer after you. But those were fun times. I miss them. To answer your question, Marco, if we are going to say, so what does death look like? Is it complete death? Is it reincarnation? Those are the questions on my mind. I'm more leaning towards reincarnation into something different as a more likely scenario. And if there is to be a painful death, then I think that Syria model or Syria trajectory is far more instructive. Remember, the only regime that completely collapsed, and we're still trying to see whether it can be built back, is Libya, Gaddafi, who was basically shot by protesters after he emerged out of a sewer. And so, but Tunisia, the empire struck back. Everything, the changes that were made were rolled back. So it's back to where it began, minus Zain al-Abidin Ben Ali, who was the dictator at the time. Egypt, Mubarak was thrown under the bus by the military, and the regime persisted. It tried to do business with the Brotherhood, didn't work out. There was a coup in 2013, and now, the current president has been in place, 13 years almost? It will be 13 years in July. So I think this is more of a Syria model. But bear in mind that this regime came to power by toppling another one. So regimes that do that want to make sure that that same thing does not happen to them at the hands of someone else. And this regime has been obsessed with that. It's built up an entire coercive, edifice of a coercive apparatus. There are so many intelligence agencies in the country that it's dizzying. I was trying to do my research for this report back in 2024, and I counted 15 different intelligence agencies. And so there's the National Police Service, there's the Basij, there's the IRGC. This is not going to die so easily. And a lot depends on what the US will do. So this is why I say regime evolution that has been accelerated. So what can happen? I think that it is safe to say that the supreme leader will exit at some point, not too much in the distant future. I would say, I don't want to say it's happening tomorrow, but I'd say I'm willing to say, in a few months' time.
Alive or dead?
In
Like, you
some
think he's going to pass away, or you think like he's going to, while he's in the world of the living, he's still going to either be taken out or agree to be taken out?
Well, nobody likes to leave. And this is his republic. This is Khamenei's republic. Khomeini died when the republic was barely 10 years old. And we've had another 3.5 decades since. So this is his republic. He's not going to leave it willingly, if you will. So there we have to assume that. Look, it, I don't know how he's managing the stress. I mean, he's turning 87 in April. He's got all sorts of ailments. And I don't know. I mean, how long can that last? People usually, like under those circumstances, heart attacks happen naturally. If not, I mean, sometimes they're induced, but barring that, there's that factor that he can pass away naturally. But I am more leaning towards him basically saying that I am passing the baton to a new supreme leader. I say that because I've been getting a lot of intelligence, and I don't know if you guys remember from the Stratfor days. I had an extensive source network inside the country, and we had code names for them back in the day. So some of them are still around, and they're still sort of singing. And from what I've learned is that the regime did not want to wait for the man to die, primarily because it becomes a public, if you will, event, which is an opportunity for people to come out and protest. So in order to avoid those protests, they wanted to front load the succession. And I'm told that there's at least one person that's sort of the favorite waiting in the wings. I don't know his name. And I haven't found out, but when I do, I will share it. But I doubt that I will know before the time comes, if it comes. So that's what the plan has been. This predates the war with Israel, and of course the protests right now. In fact, the war with Israel, I'm told, created a sense of urgency that, hey, let's move with this. Let's get over this so that we don't, we stabilize. I think the protests derailed that entire process, but it could still happen. The assumption is that the regime can hold its own. So he can have an orderly succession. He could die a natural death. And by orderly succession, I mean him sort of saying, because he's got nowhere to go. This man hasn't traveled outside of the country ever, as far as I remember. He may have traveled a few places when he was president between 81 and 89. But since 89, he has not traveled anywhere. So I doubt that he's going to go to Russia like Assad. It's a very different culture, different mindset. He has far bigger of an ego. So he's not going to leave his country. So what he wants is a situation where he's able to survive. So I think what's going to happen is if things go south, the crowds cannot be controlled, things become worse, then I can see, the regular armed forces, which now have 3 seats to IRGC's 1 on the Supreme National Security Council, saying, "Sir, it's time."
So first of all, Kamran, let me come in on this. First of all, Jacob, I think we need a nickname for Kamran. I think he is our Shams Charania. So basically, everyone who's not following Kamran on Twitter, you got to be on there because when the free agency period opens up in Iran, he's going to be tweeting about who Iranian government is going to recruit for their next their lead point guard.
He's the Shams of the Gulf or the Woj of the Caspian. I don't know. I'll play with it. I'll get there.
Well, yes, we got to work on this. We got to shop floor it. The other thing I want to double click on right now, since you are saying that this might be one of those situations where the CEO departs, but the board of directors stays. Like we're not actually have a full house cleaning. I think this is the case as well. That would be my view of how this goes. So a couple of questions on that. I'm just going to rattle them off and you just think about how you want to answer them. But first and foremost, this is a great example. I think we're living through this example of do geopolitical imperatives truly limit maneuvering room, or do personalities and ideologies matter? So the big question mark has always been if Iran were to have regime change, would they change their foreign policy? Would they still be enemies of Israel? Would they have a better attitude with America? And one of the things we've seen this regime do is actually, bury the hatchet with Saudi Arabia quite effectively. I mean, one of the reasons there wasn't a kick up in oil prices last year, even though rockets are flying left, right, and center, is because Iran never retaliated against Saudi facilities. It told the Houthis to make sure all the retaliation goes south, not north. Not a single drone wandered into the empty quarter. It's a regime that's been able to kind of like diversify its foreign policy. They've proven to be quite malleable. So, can you have a CEO change and then the direction change of this country? Like, is that possible? Even with the same edifice, the same board of directors, would the CEO change matter? The second thing I have for you is that did they wait too long? You're kind of inferring that in your story, like, well, they were going to do this. This is the plan. There was a plan, and they don't want supreme leader to die. In fact, that is then potentially a trigger for protests. But now that protests are here, did they wait too long? And will the change be seen as a weakness of the regime that actually then incites protests further? And finally, I just want to say to our listeners, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that you were absolutely right. I mean, the president Pezeshkian was singing from a completely different hymn book. He's talking about how these protesters are, struggling people, just protesting the affordability. And then the supreme leader comes out and says, like, they're doing Trump's bidding and so on and so on. So we're definitely seeing, I mean, like, this is the president of the country and the supreme leader not agreeing. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit of that too, like the evidence that you have. And also this role of the regular military relative to the IRGC. For the three of us, I think it's clear what that means, but for a lot of our listeners, they may not be. IRGC is kind of like the SS relative to the Wehrmacht, and there's this natural, obviously, rivalry between the two, both for resources, for commercial, and economic influence in the country, but maybe elaborate on that as well. So sorry, I threw a bunch of stuff on you.
I want to stack one more like cordwood on, because Kamran mentioned the president, supreme leader. I still have no clue what the heck happened to Ibrahim Raisi, who seemed to be the one that was getting groomed to general, like the mysterious helicopter accident on the border. So I don't know if you have any like clarity years out from what happened there. Is that part of the story? Was it just a helicopter accident? I mean, probably not. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to throw that element in there too.
So that's a lot of questions, but all really awesome ones. Let me dispense with Raisi first, because by saying that I hear often from contacts that this conspiracy theory that he was offed by those who want to turn the regime towards a pragmatic direction. So it's the infighting between within sort of the IRGC as well. It's not the IRGC versus the regular armed forces, but it's intra-IRGC as well. Back to Marco's point about, but look, helicopters crash too, so things happen. But it's an interesting thing that happened, who it happened to, where it happened, where was he coming from, and the moment. And then suddenly, Pezeshkian, out of nowhere, a very, reformist person, is suddenly allowed, and his whole election is engineered by the establishment. So we can get into all sorts of conspiracy theories.
Helicopters, I can confirm, as one of the greatest fans of Kobe Bryant, peace be upon him, that yes, helicopters do crash. They can crash without the need of IRGC intervening. So that is true. But you're right. You're right. And no, we don't spend enough time on this. Pezeshkian came out of nowhere, and they could have replaced Raisi with another Raisi. Like, right? Why go for the reformist? So that's
because they realized that they came to the end of the road. They needed to go back. It's strange how these regimes behave. You bring Rouhani, a pragmatic conservative / reformist. He goes through 2 terms, gets a nuclear deal. Nuclear deal is next. Then he's replaced by Raisi. and then Raisi, what doesn't even complete one full term. And then you go back to somebody to the left of Rouhani. And so it's really interesting thing that you are noting, Marco. But going back to ideology and geopolitics and geography, I think ideology is for the lower ranks, people who are down the food chain. When you, in any ideological enterprise, by the time you get to a leadership position, ideology has been instrumentalized. And ideology is only as good as it allows you to be flexible and do the practical things that are necessary that can, that make you something, that make you an actor of any worth. Otherwise, as I say, there are a lot of people foaming at their mouth every day, everywhere on the planet. They're not threats. It's tradecraft what makes them threats. And so that brings us to sort of, the personality of the leadership. And that takes you so far. But the superstructure that, in my view, constrains decision making are those impersonal forces that you and I and Jacob and others have sort of worked on for as long as we can remember. So that's sort of my point on that. Now, you make a very good analogy with the board of directors. Let me add a little bit to that. I think that this board of directors is incoherent as well. So it's not like the board of directors are all on the same page. The chair serves at the pleasure of the board because as long as a company is making money. The moment that stops happening, then do we need a new chair? Does the company need a new CEO? So on and so forth. I think that process is problematic. So, and an analogy, quick one, don't want to digress too much. In the case of former Pakistani President Musharraf, his board of directors basically decided it was time for him to go, and he went. Okay, it was very clear the board of directors have been very institutionalized. In Iran, there are clerics, but not so powerful anymore. But there are two military forces, and they are angling. As I said, the war with Israel decimated the top leadership of the IRGC. That allowed for the regular armed forces, the Artesh, to become joint chief. So the joint chief, the new head of Artesh, plus the defense minister Pezeshkian chose, is also from the Artesh Air Force. So three guys compared to one IRGC commander who's new to the job because his many superiors were killed. Several layers of superiors were killed in June of last year. So it's a weak IRGC presence. On top of that, this board saw there's a chair of the board, but maybe we can call them convener of the board. In this case, the secretary of the National Security Council was an IRGC 2-star general. He was also removed, and he was replaced by a guy who's neither a cleric and neither a military guy, former parliamentary speaker Ali Larijani from the powerful Larijani clan. So now, with Pezeshkian's cabinet, foreign affairs minister and intelligence minister, and these other people, this loose coalition led by Artesh dominates the board but does not have full authority over it. So what I'm trying to say is that it's going to be hard for them to move forward in a coherent fashion. And then it's the difference in sort of the scope and scale of authority that the two militaries have. The Artesh, somewhere between 350,000 to 400,000 men in uniform. Okay, that's their strength, numerical strength. Versus IRGC, 150 to 225,000. But the stark difference is that the IRGC, despite being a smaller force, is constitutionally enabled, empowered to not just be a political actor, but also have its hand in the cookie jar. In fact, I call the IRGC the cookie jar. They don't have their hand. All of the IRGC is in the cookie jar, maybe is the cookie jar. Why? Because they control everything. The oil exports, the industry, the sanctions busting, telecommunications. There is no private sector in this country because it's the IRGC companies that are running the show. Either people still serving, and that's the other thing is that IRGC commanders, it's not really clear, do they ever retire? Do they ever sort of leave offices? There's no formal retirement announced. So the title still is with them. And do they, so what is their influence over even after getting replaced? So it's not really clear. Do you actually retire? Like, can we say, are you a retired general? I haven't seen that in the case of Iran. So this IRGC has had way too much influence. The nuclear program is run by them, the ballistic missiles, sanctions busting, everything. And, a former national security chief, just to give you an example of how, influential these people are, is a rear admiral, Ali Shamkhani, who served as the veteran of the Iraq War. Interesting tidbit about him: he's an ethnic Arab from Ahvaz, who became part of the elite of the regime because at one point he was given control of command of both the IRGC Navy and the regular Navy. That made him very powerful. Then he became defense minister. Then he became national security chief. And he used his position to amass massive amounts of wealth. He has his own business empire based out of Dubai. His son, and I forget his first name, who's also a Shamkhani. I think his name is Ali. Not Ali is the father. I think his name is Ahmad or something. But he goes by the name of Hector. Google this in Bloomberg, Hector Shamkhani. There's an entire profile on the guy, and he's like a businessman. And this guy, his father survived, the airstrikes. He was wounded in the airstrikes. I think the Israelis were targeting him. But just giving you an example of one commander, think of the entire edifice. And when you have a regime like that is circumventing sanctions, engaged in smuggling and whatnot, corruption is like the way of life.
Let me interject here because that's very important. Sanction busting is a very lucrative business. Again, I apologize to keep referring to my own homeland, but it is one example that's quite pertinent for this situation. Slobodan Milosevic's family became incredibly wealthy due to the sanctions. So there was this perverse incentive for him not to actually do things that would loosen sanctions because his son was engaged in running basically gasoline smuggling, which was important for a country that didn't have oil capabilities. But in this particular case, quite often the argument is made that the IRGC, because they profit from the sanctions in many ways, they don't want to move the country towards a more conciliatory attitude towards the West. But I would ask, for quite sophisticated commercial operation, would they not make money both ways? In other words, yes, they would lose some of their privileges from sanction busting. But on the other hand, if you open up the South Pars natural gas field to exploration, I mean, you've got a president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, baby, who he calls Desi Rodriguez. What was it? He called her, Jacob, like a fascinating woman.
I missed that.
She's his girl now.
I'll find it.
I mean,
did he call her Hector? No.
No, I mean, President Trump has clearly shown that he is open to making deals with the vestiges of these axis of evil regimes. So if I'm sitting,
I mean, if he invited the former head of Al Qaeda in Syria to the White House,
yes. Yeah, I mean, where do we stop? Cristiano Mamapur is sitting across the guy. Tell us about your story. I'm what do you mean? He was
and apparently President Trump called her a terrific
ISIS.
person was the exact quote.
A terrific person who has a good jump shot. He's out there playing, basketball with the American servicemen. Listen, my point is, Hector, God bless him, right? Let's make a deal. If you're making money off of drug smuggling, here's your opportunity. At no other time since Andrew Jackson has America had as non-normative, anti-normative foreign policy. This is your chance to strike a deal where the IRGC profits from the end of sanctions. So isn't there an opening here to making a deal with these, because what you're describing is you're answering my question. They're not ideological. They're pragmatic. They're all flipping through the latest Porsche Cayenne catalogs up in Tehran. They're not like thinking about Quranic verses. They clearly are not. So, like, why isn't it then there's a rationality to the IRGC, especially after being attacked by Israel so viciously, to maybe make a deal so that they don't just profit from sanctions, but actually from legitimate trade, that would supposedly be unlocked by just kind of packaging a couple of bad apples in a revolutionary turnover.
Now, that's a great point, and that sort of leads me. It's a nice segue into what I wanted to say next. Look, we have this view of the IRGC sort of as a monolith. It has never been a monolith. Look, any institution, as it becomes sophisticated, as its scope and mandate expands, and it grows, there's natural factionalization, and we have to understand that the IRGC. There is a real difference between the IRGC in terms of ideological fealty versus the clergy. The clergy are sort of like the true believers because this is the stuff that they come and make up and they try to impose it on people. The IRGC started out as their henchmen. Okay. Now the henchmen became powerful over time because the clerics needed
and
rich, of course. And so the IRGC is fragmented internally. There are at least 3 camps that I can discern, if not more. And, ideological fealty is not uniform. I remember, going back to the era of Ahmadinejad, when there used to be this public conversation in Iran as to why is it. So the argument went like this. We have been under sanctions, but look how we have expanded our influence in the region. The reference was to Hezbollah, the Assad regime, the Iraqi actors and Houthis, and etc. And we did this while being under sanctions. What if we didn't have sanctions? In other words, they're already thinking about making more money, okay? Have been for quite some time. But getting everybody on the same page within this space is hard. Because there's inertia, there are people who are more ideological. There is also this idea that former President Rouhani, when he came to power in 2013, served for 2 terms. He struggled against the IRGC to say we need to claw back a civilian private sector space. You need to give room. You need to make room for this. So a lot of these commanders say, well, this isn't good for my business. But there are others who say, let's do a deal with the US and we'll be making more money.
Look, this is, Kamran, this is a story as old as time. I mean, for God's sakes, that's what The Godfather was about. The father is a mafioso criminal killing with his bare hands. The son is a Ivy League educated lawyer, and the grandson is
killing with his own hands.
Yeah, well, on occasion, not really with his own hands, rarely. And then, the grandson is an opera singer, right? And I mean, if I am an IRGC commander right now looking at what's going on, I'm starting to think about in terms of equity stakes. You know what I mean? I'm starting to think in terms of like transitioning, right? Like privatization. Maybe I grab some of these future private companies. I mean, right? I mean, this is like the collapse of the Soviet Union. The people who ended up running Russia,
the oligarchs
were all members in some way, shape, or form of the security services, but then they became businessmen, right? And they became businessmen, started transacting in equity stakes, and lawyers became their
look, you know what? I don't know if the Iranians are ready for this, but I think Donald J. Trump is the man for this moment.
That's what I mean, right? Yeah. There will never have another president who's open to this.
Yes.
There will never have another president who will turn a blind eye to human rights violations, to gender inequality, to, perceived ills and faults of the last 20 years, including by financing and executing the anti-American insurgency in Iraq, and on and on and on and on. This is your blank slate. You've got 18 months before the man starts getting overwhelmed with congressional hearings, and then who knows who comes after him. So, right, they're on the clock. And if they're listening, listen. For all of our listeners in the IRGC right now, if you're listening to this, I just want to say, like, make a deal, brother. You've got 6 months.
Well, I don't want to go that far so as to call these guys brothers, but I get your point. And so you're right. You know, whatever you just said, you're right. The problem with the IRGC is it's too big, too diverse, too many cooks in the kitchen, just not able to sort of come together. They can't even herd their cats. And they are now, they've been weakened, but they still are relied upon for internal security. Can they manage internal security? And then, the real guys who actually are ready to do this deal are the regular armed forces. This is their moment. They've not had access to resources. They've been politically marginalized. They have been financially kept, constrained. Whatever budget was assigned to them, they didn't have their own companies running. So this is their moment. And plus, they're more of a professional force. They're definitely not ideological. But I want to go back to what you basically said, what comes next. I think, and I wrote in my report in 2024 that it's easy to see how this regime, by and large, 70-80% of Islamism is just thrown out the window. There's some left as token and whatnot. But what this regime and what Iran will not cease to be is Iranian nationalist with an imperial outlook. So Hezbollah to Soleimani was both an instrument and an ideological ally. For the next dispensation, Hezbollah is just an instrument. So we don't care about the religion and whatnot. Are you making Iran great again or not? And if you are, then all good. And so they will not behave very differently. They'll behave more pragmatically. They'll become more moderate, for a lack of a better term. Think of this as China did not become pro-Western like Japan and Germany did. Once the Nixon administration sort of opened up those relations, U.S. businesses poured money and technology. The Chinese used that and to become their own thing because they have their own ambitions. They're not willing to become part of, the American strategy for the world. I would say Iran is similar. I don't think Iran will become less, if you will. It'll become less revisionist, less radical in its approach, but its interests are still the same. Now, that's sort of the bad news. The good news is that Iran is now in a long-term period of inward looking. It'll have to sort out all sorts of things, which means the Turks and the Azerbaijanis and I would even throw in the Pakistanis, will have the ability to sort of constrain this, or at least the opportunity. I don't know if we can call it ability to constrain Iran until it leaps out again. So it's becoming more inward, if you will, as I see it.
Let me expand on that. Okay, I see your point. Nationalist Iran, but one of the things that is interesting to me is that antagonism towards the United States of America made Iran focus on imperialism towards the parts of its near abroad where America operates. And so Lebanon becomes critical. But in truth, like, when did Persia ever really rule Lebanon? It was very, very few times. Very few times. It's not
Pre-Islam.
Pre-Islam, exactly. It's when it was invading Athens and Sparta. Like, we're talking like thousands of years ago.
Before Christ.
And the far more natural expansion of Iranian sphere of influence would be to the north and to the east. So to your point, Pakistan, I mean, about 50% of Afghanistan is Dari speaking, I believe, right?
Actually, it's the lingua franca of everybody, including the Pashtuns.
Okay, well, there you go. So like in Afghanistan, a form of Farsi, is basically the lingua franca. So Afghanistan, where you have this Sunni militant theocracy nobody likes, is back in charge. In the north, you have Tajikistan, which is basically Farsi speaking.
They need to change their script for this to work out.
That's right. But also Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, you're talking about a sphere of influence. So in other words, and hold me back, right? Hold me back, Kamran, because maybe I'm getting beyond myself. But when you think about the West and the South, I think Iran has as much as it's ever going to have. The deal with Saudi Arabia effectively handed them Iraq. You can expand on this, because I was always confused why Muqtada al-Sadr went into retirement and joined the Brookings Institution or whatever it is that he's doing now in retirement. But in Iraq, basically,
the Brookings Institution in downtown Tehran.
But it's fascinating, because he was leading an insurgency and a fight against. He was fighting the good fight against the Iranian-backed militias. Iraq is effectively run.
But he was also on their payroll.
Okay. Well, you can expand on this, because what I find fascinating is Iraq is effectively a province of Iran now. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right about that.
Okay, so you got the max you can get. Who cares about Lebanon and Syria? Meh. Come on. But on the east, you have alignment with America. Hey, look, Russia looks like it's going to be the sick man of Eurasia. Russia looks like it's going to have the worst decade of its existence since the early 20th century. And you have Afghanistan, which is a thorn in the eye of the West. I mean, the Taliban are back. There's a real alignment with imperialist Iran. In other words, if you want to be imperialist, America's got something for you. And it's actually, America will be a wind in your sails. Go ahead with Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, spread your wings in this direction, right? Stop bothering Israel and Saudi Arabia, aside from the detente over Iraq, which is holding. I mean, Saudis don't seem to be financing anybody to subvert Iranian influence in
The
Iraq.
Saudis actually couldn't find anybody to finance.
They couldn't find anyone. Okay, there you go. So I hear you. This is a regime that will not become pro-American. However, just like with Mao's China during the Cold War, there can be points of agreement. Because if Iran started spreading its influence in the Pakistani sphere of influence or the Russian sphere of influence, hey, God bless him. As President Trump said after he bombed them, God bless Iran. The U.S. can help with that.
I don't think that the President Trump. I think he likes the Field Marshal of Pakistan too much for that.
Oh yeah, there you go. Okay, maybe, but
but you're right. Look, let me sort of add to what you just said. If you are the stands and you've been eternally landlocked, okay, to the north, the Kazakhs cannot export oil, which is their lifeline, without sort of using Russian pipelines. So they're handicapped there. The shortest route from Central Asia to the high seas goes through Iran. You don't want to go into Afghanistan. It's a mess. It's on multiple fronts. But Iran is a mess. I know the Central Asians are hoping that the U.S. and the Iranians reach some sort of an accommodation. There's sanctions respite. And then that gives them opportunity to do, their commerce through Iran. Because that's just, I mean, if you're Uzbekistan, you're double landlocked. So yes, you're absolutely right about that. I think that this regime, because this regime isn't going to go quietly into the night anytime soon, it will be very, very messy. We're looking at long-term instability inside Iran. And I think I shared my piece with Jacob. I need to get with you on WhatsApp, man. I need your WhatsApp number to be able to share stuff. But I shared my piece today that I wrote about the regional implications of whatever is happening in Iran. How does this affect Turkey? How does this affect Azerbaijan, the eastern flank, Iraq, and so on and so forth? So I think that before they can get to an empire, they have to sort of. It's going to be a while before they get to
for sure. But I think my point is more that we sometimes overstate geography and geopolitics. And what I mean by that is that, yes, Iran is never going to cease seeing itself as a civilization, as one of the foundational civilization of planet Earth. It's never going to want to subvert itself to the US. However, both Iran and US could find commonality even in their expansive empire, right?
Yes, because and under this new geostrategy that the United States has rolled out, where it's burden sharing / burden shifting, where we're not doing the heavy lifting in any part of the world, at least on the Eurasian landmass, and therefore we need allied and partner nations, whether in the Europe and the Middle East. Right now, Iran is problematic, so we don't know what to do with it. So Turkey, Israel, and Saudi, can you guys figure it out? And we're going to do it. We're going to sort of be operating from a higher altitude. At some point, I can see the United States, if this scenario plays out and they reach some sort of an accommodation with a future Iranian state or regime or government, then that happens. So yeah, no, I'm with you on that. That there is the opportunity. The issue is between now and when that opportunity arises, there's a very long and messy road ahead.
For sure. And the most important part of the national security strategy, I just want to reiterate it for our listeners. Jacob and I did a pod on that, but it was this part. The United States cannot allow any nation to become so dominant that it could threaten our interests. This does not mean wasting blood and treasure to curtail the influence of all the world's great and middle powers. The outsized influence of larger, richer, and stronger nations is a timeless truth of international relations. And that puts to death Hillary Clinton's quip in 2011 that the United States of America does not recognize spheres of influence. I mean, you have a national security strategy document that says, no, we do. We absolutely recognize spheres of influence. And in the case of Iran, what the United States and Israel have very clearly illustrated to Iran is that their sphere of influence does not extend in the Levant. Like, this isn't time of Xerxes. Sorry, buddy. But Euphrates and Tigris, nobody cares about that. Have fun in Mesopotamia. And then if you want
figure it out with the Turks.
Yes, figure it out with the Turks. It's up to you to delineate that. But if you want to go north and east, we can help with that.
Tame the Taliban.
At the very least. And then,
what a
and then
great deal.
potentially,
The IRGC is going to totally take this deal. You want us to tame the Taliban? I
By
want
the
to
way-
push back here a little bit because,
by the way,
I mean,
wait, hold on, Jacob,
okay,
before
go
you do
ahead,
it,
because I'm
before you do it, I just
sitting
want
here
to say one
quietly. I'm
thing.
about to light my hair on fire.
I was going to ask, when are you going to
I
say
have
something?
notes sketched. I'm just being polite. Go ahead.
I just love the fact that basically Kamran has effectively illustrated the plot from Syriana. This is literally the plot from Syriana, and I think that he is Matt Damon. Kamran is Matt Damon. That's his route. So when the IRGC gets a new leadership on board, reach out to Kamran.
I'm sure he likes that. No, first of all, or Marco, I just want to say, this idea that they have to make a deal now. I don't know, the United States has done tons of nefarious things when it comes to Iran. Iran-Contra anyone? We're going to support Iraq publicly, but we're going to shuttle weapons to you guys via the Israelis. That was the Reagan administration that did that. You want to support a regime in the region that has an antiquated medieval point of view on the relationship between church and state, which is run by an authoritarian dictator who probably wants a nuclear deterrent of his own. May I introduce you to Mohammed bin Salman? We've been dealing with assholes in the region for some time. It's never really made sense that we didn't like these particular assholes. That was all a Cold War anachronistic hangover. So there was always going to be a potential for the United States to offer Iran some kind of deal. And if I'm Iran, I liked the JCPOA Obama version way better than I like whatever I'm getting from the Trump administration, which is, maybe I'll bomb you, maybe I won't. You want to have some Central Asia? That's fine too. Turkey, by the way, also wants Central Asia. So does China, India, everybody else. Kamran, the most disturbing thing to me in what you said, though, is the division between the army and the IRGC, because that sounds like civil war to me. Because to your point, the IRGC, not going to go quietly into that night. Ahmadinejad was the one who enabled them to start eating the economy. Rouhani got in trouble for trying to take the economy back from them. You got to think the current reformist is in the same sort of camp. So if they're going to hold on very deeply to what they have, the military is going to have to take it from them. The flip side of this is if the IRGC is akin to the Egyptian military, to go back to the Arab Spring metaphor, then what probably happens next, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, I hope I am completely wrong, but they're just going to crush the people, and they're just going to keep ruling, and they're just going to keep playing the game until they can get some kind of deal or some kind of multipolar alignment that works for them. Like there's no, I don't know, like I'm just not hearing any. The most disturbing thing I heard from you was the potential for civil war inside of Iran. But it sounds like what's off the table from both of you is democratic transition or true revolution. And I'm also just not convinced that the supreme leader Maduro comparison. Are you just going to do to Venezuela what you did to Iran? Like, I don't know. Like, I know that you're saying that
No,
like the ideology is just for the proletariat, um, but like the supreme leader is the supreme Shiite figure. Like, you're just gonna like just say bye, and the regime is.
yeah, but
I don't know.
he, yeah, no, I get it. But this supreme leader also knows how to make those turns when they're necessary. He's ideological, but he agreed to the JCPOA. So he's really an operator in that sense. Yes, he's still very ideological, but I look at him and say he from his point of view, look, this is his republic. He made it. He doesn't want to lose it. Everything that he's ever worked for in his life is this. So he's not going to give up on it. So in other words, yes, there's ideology, but there's this personalization, grafting of the personality over the state and its sort of shaping of the ideological outlook. Look, civil war, yeah, absolutely. That is a worst case scenario. If let's play this out. If you are the military and we're still playing by the book, which is the Constitution, we're still in that space, then you can't have an overt role. The regular armed forces. That's the IRGC's turf. You can't say what changes need to be made in the economy because you are, again, apolitical by the book. And then you have no role in domestic security that was given to the IRGC since inception. And then the besiege was given to the IRGC in 2009. This is several 100,000 to 1 million men, poorly trained, but with lots of uniforms and guns and motorcycles, and drunk on a heavy dose of ideology. And so these people are the ones doing it. Now, let's say, so what do you do if you're the Artesh, if you're the regular armed forces? You sit tight and you say, okay, all right, we don't want to break this this thing just yet. What can you crowd control? If you can't, then we're going to have to step in. And they already have allies amongst the pragmatists within the IRGC, but there's no clean sort of way in which all of this comes together, which is why there's this huge risk of internal civil war if they cannot stabilize the situation, because there is no way that this can continue from the point of view of the regular armed forces. They are not going to shoot at the protesters. This is the same regular armed forces that told the Shah, sir, we're not opening fire. And he fell. And that's how we got this regime. And this regular armed forces is, obviously it's been sliced and diced and reshaped and reformatted, but still, they're not the ideological core of the regime. And they're not going to sit around and say, okay, the country is now being, where there are airstrikes from the US, because if things go south, Trump is not going to sit around. He can't sit around. This is an election year. He's got all sorts of pressures on him. And he needs wins on the foreign policy front because he can't have wins on the domestic policy front. So he needs to make sure that his party doesn't lose the midterms, which directly affects his authority. And, he doesn't want to be lame duck for his last 2 years in power. So the regular armed forces have to factor all of this in. And so they're going to give them space until there is space to give. And then they're going to jump in and they're going to say, well, some things can't go by the book. So the declaration of state of emergency / martial law, we don't want to go and fire. Let the IRGC take the blame. It's reviled, nationally hated. We want to be seen as the saviors. And therefore, that's where I distinguish between the regime and the state. Maybe the regime is salvageable. Most likely not. Maybe it transforms, but then it could also fall. But what can't fall from the point of view of the regular armed forces is the state, is the institutions, is the ability of the country to remain a country. Because otherwise, there are so many these forces that can tear this country apart. You have Baloch in the southeast. You have the Kurds. You have ethnic Azeris in the northwest. You have the Turkmens. You have the Arabs in the southwest. So this is a messy. This can go into a very messy situation quite fast because this is a very dynamic situation. So again, slow death. We don't know how the patient will die, and on which bed, and in which operating room.
It's a republic if you can tear gas it. Kamran, we have to start landing the plane. So, Marco, cousin, I'll give the last word to you. I from this conversation actually take that maybe nothing is going to happen, but I'll leave it to Marco for the last word.
Well, I think, Kamran's the expert and I defer to him, but I think that this last point is really important one that I'm surprised it took us, 55 minutes to get to, which is that, in many ways, Iran resembles Lebanon much more than any other country in the Middle East. And that's a bad thing for its future, and by which, Farsi-speaking Persians are 50% of the population. It's a country that
50% is ethnically Persians. But everybody speaks Farsi.
Everybody speaks Farsi, but ethnic Persians are 50%. So the country strives towards some form of authoritarianism and a heavy hand for, I don't want to say good reason, but for logical reason. It is a very multi-ethnic country. And if the regime collapses, that could incentivize some of these ethnic groups that do have active, actually, resistance. You mentioned the Baluchis as an example. I mean, that could become a source of tension, and I think that is a good warning sign to the U.S. to play this very carefully if it has any influence over the future. I don't think that a civil war in Iran is really something that anybody would really want.
Well, Kamran, can I just say the flip side of that is that the great Iranian empires of the past, to your point, Kamran, they never the modern nation state is not the model that they went under. They were famous for the degree of autonomy and control they gave to the people over whom they governed, which is true right of the Israelites too. It's the Persians that come and let them rebuild the temple because they don't care about the ideology and things like that. That was what allowed them to form a multi-ethnic empire, and it's what has made Iranian influence and Persian language and Persian culture and all of these things, to your point, why does Iran have that influence in Central Asia and places like that? Precisely because they rejected sort of modern nation state forms. They could be something more than what they were. And I think you're right that the weird thing about the Islamic Republic is that it doubled down on this weird Shiite autocracy thing, whereas the big strength of Iran was actually its multi-ethnic composition, that it figured out how to exist for thousands of years doing this by giving control and sharing wealth with local populations. I don't, and not distinctly opposed to the Turks or the Ottomans. The time that Iran gets to push to the Mediterranean is when the Turks are licking their own wounds and are constrained because of their loss in World War I. But I'll let Kamran finish us off.
Yeah, so on that point, there's a fun fact here. So the modern nation state of Iran, its modern borders were set in the early to late 19th century, but it grew out of the major first empire post the rise of Islam, called the Safavid Empire in 1501. That empire had all of what is modern day Iran, parts of Iraq, parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, but mostly most importantly, it had all of the South Caucasus, even parts of the North Caucasus, all the way to Dagestan to the border of Chechnya, and large parts of Turkmenistan. And so those northern areas and the eastern areas were lost to the Russians and the Brits in the 19th century. So it shrunk to where it is. But the foundations of modern Iran were built, and that's where Shia Islam came, is that the Safavid monarch, Shah Ismail I in 1501, established the Safavid dynasty. And he said, from this day forward, Shia Islam is going to be state religion. Who was he? He was not a Persian. He was an Azerbaijani Turk who established a Persian empire. So this is why Azeris, who make up about 25% of all Iranian nationals, they don't have a rebel movement within their milieu like the Kurds and the Arabs and the Baloch do. They see themselves as the leaders of everything Persianate. In other words, they see themselves as the ones who should be controlling Tehran and everything Persian and Iranian. They define what Iran is. Khamenei is Azeri ethnically. Pezeshkian is Azeri ethnically.
Yeah, it's in his name very, very clearly.
and lots of military generals are the former chief of staff who got killed by the Israelis, the Joint Chief. He was Azeri, and this is something fascinating. And so we just need to see how all of this plays out. So there's going to be a Turkey role, there's going to be an Azerbaijan role, and the ethnic Azeris are going to play a disproportionate amount of influence over the future of an Iranian state and whatever becomes of this regime. So I just want to leave with that thought that when we talk about Persians, we think of Persians and Turks as sort of binaries, but for a long time, ethnically Turkic peoples developed a language that was heavily Persianized.
Well, I think that's sorry, Jacob. I just wanted to say that's great. But as I listened about this, I know we always try to do second derivative, third derivative, like thinking beyond the immediate. All I hear from what you're saying is that Russia's kind of screwed in this, and I know maybe Jacob and I are biased towards that, but that is where the real clash of civilization happened. It's not necessarily Iran and the West. It's more Iran and the North.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's already clear. The Russians lost to the Turks in terms of the South Caucasus. The Russians being stuck in Ukraine gives a lot of room for the Central Asians to do a lot of things that the Russians don't want. The Chinese have come in with all sorts of money.
Yeah.
And that's not going to change. So Russia can't become again imperial because now the Chinese are not going to allow their money to go be flushed down the toilet just because the Russians want to reconquer Central Asia, assuming they can. So yes, I think there is a southwards push northwards, if you will. This involves the Turks. The Americans with Trump route in Armenia are part of this. The Chinese are playing in Central Asia. Iran is going to be part of this equation. And so, yes, Russia is a third world country with nukes.
All right, well, I did my job because I got, it took me an hour, but it took me an hour to get Kamran to reference the Safavid dynasty, but I did my job. There are those, Kamran, who always wait for us to get there in our podcast together, so I'm happy to have achieved that. We'll have you back soon, cousin, all right?
All right, great.
All right, well, we hope you enjoyed the conversation with Kamran. Cousin, what are your first thoughts? I have some thoughts, but what are your thoughts first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, Kamran knows, infinitely more than me about Iran, and I respect his view greatly. And all I would say is that sometimes the more you know, the less likely it is that you will see inertia towards something new. And so he's pumping the brakes on like, hey, this is the end of the regime. But one of the reasons he said that is because he uses my analogy of like the board versus the CEO. The CEO might change, the board doesn't. And I think that that could actually be profoundly significant in this case. Um,
Yeah, I think he's also like you're right. I mean, Kamran has forgotten more about this part of the world than I will ever know, and I'm somebody who like cut his teeth as a Middle East analyst. But I mean, there was a tweet I really liked from Josh Holmes. He's I don't actually listen to the Ruthless podcast, but I loved this tweet. He said, "News: U.S. likely or perhaps unlikely to attack Iran in the next 24 to 24,000 hours." And I feel like that's everything with this right now. Like, is the regime going to fall? Is it going to remain? Is it going to be civil war? Is Trump going to bomb? Is he not going to bomb? Like, I've heard every single permutation of this over the last week or so. And I think you're exactly right. The closer you are to something, the harder it is to take a step back and analyze, which is why Kamran is trying to have his cake and eat it too. I love you, Kamran, but you're trying to say, yes, this regime cannot continue. And also it's going to be a slow erosion and maybe it will morph into something else and the board will stay the same. And it's like, well, actually, those two things can't like continue at the same time. But for me, actually, the most important thing that um, most important thing Kamran said about Iran that I think we forget in the West is this is not your average nation state. This
mm,
was an empire. They think of themselves as an empire. They're not going to take the scraps off the table from Donald Trump. They offer some kind of deal like that. They're going to be like, do you know who we are? Do you know for how many thousands of years we were here well before there were any Europeans in North America? We will be here well after there are any Europeans, white people running around North America. Don't presume to tell us what to do. Like, I think from the supreme leader down to your rank and file, um, like Iranian median voter, I just think that sentiment is there. So like I just and when we're dealing with Iran, when we're dealing with spheres of influence and great powers, like this is a great power. This is an imperial power. It's not just your garden variety. I'm going to bomb them and kidnap their dictator and go away. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
no, I mean, I think that's a great point that Kamran brought. I think also you eked out another point out of Kamran, which is that a significant civil war could result. And it was nice to be reminded of the different factionalism in Iran. So unlike Saudi Arabia, unlike unlike even Iraq, quite frankly, where 70% are Shia
Right.
Arabs, you're talking about a country where the dominant majority is barely a majority, it's just over 50% Persian ethnics. And then you have a huge percent of the Iranian population, actually greater than the population of Azerbaijan, are Azerbaijanis. I mean, does Azerbaijan as a country, is it viable? Does it make sense in a world where Iran is now overtly imperialist towards the north? And no longer sees itself as a Shia Islamic theocracy, but rather as that Persian empire of the past.
Mhm.
Suddenly Azerbaijan as a country is brought into question. And so is, a lot of other things. And um, I think that that potential for IRGC versus military was also something that Kamran reminded us of. The rising influence of the regular military is important. They are larger in numbers. IRGC is, licking its wounds after being expressly targeted by Israelis. How does that resolve itself? So you could have an ethnic conflict in Iran post-regime. You could have a military on military conflict in Iran. It's a very messy situation. And I think that US and President Trump was, I think, right to back off over the last 24 hours. Because, I mean, that's what Kamran is effectively saying. And what you're saying, too, like American involvement in this transition is not going to help. It's not helpful.
Well, yeah, and I don't think it'll affect anything. Like this is for Iranians to figure out, and I think they'll figure it out. And the thing we didn't bring up with Kamran, if we'd had another hour, and this is where I think it becomes geopolitically relevant, because I actually am not sure that what happens inside of Iran is going to be geopolitically relevant over the next 12 months. I could be wrong about that. Like I even wrote a piece on Substack that crafted the alternative point of view. But the further we get down this, the further I get that. But um, Iranian weakness means Turkish strength. And like, just look at what's happening on the ground in Syria today. It used to be that Israel would go in and trim the hedges because they were worried about Iranian support of Syria and the Assad regime, and to Lebanon because of Hezbollah. It's actually upped its operations in Syria because you've got pro-Turkish forces that are there that are also trying to solidify themselves. And the weaker that Iran is, the stronger Turkey is, the more that Turkey starts to fill that vacuum. And I think that's the geopolitical force that I think is underappreciated here. And if I were the Trump administration And you read that section from the national security strategy. If you're worried about the creation of a power that could restrict American influence and things like that, what you should be worried about is an unchecked Turkey, because they are unchecked. Without Iran there, the center of the Middle East is open for business for them. The Saudis are not going to stop them. The Israelis are not going to stop them. The Egyptians are broke. Like, that's your Mediterranean power that's hiding in plain sight. I don't think we talk about them.
No, we don't. They fly F-16s. So Israel.
Yeah,
Israel is not going to be putting bombs in pagers of Turkish generals. That's going to be a different story, right? Altogether. So I think it's interesting, and I mean, I think this is where we're fully back in the 19th century, cousin. And I wish we had this podcast in 1860s, and the second best thing is 2026. So it's very, very interesting. And I do think that if we were going to become normative and moralistic for a second, which we rarely are on this pod, I do think that almost any alternative in Iran, short of a civil war, which is terrible, and I don't wish it upon anybody, but short of that, I think almost any alternative is better than a bunch of octogenarians who believe in like theological scripture. Like almost anything is better than that. Straight up Marxism is better than that. You know what I mean? So, I think everybody can kind of like be happy that this theocracy, the last one on the planet, it appears to be in its dying throes.
Yeah, I hope you're right. North Korea is interesting. Is it a theocracy? Is it, as Christopher Hitchens described it, a necrocracy? Because all the old leaders are still technically alive in the minds of that's the big domino to fall. All right, well, cousin, that's our recap on the conversation with Kamran. Anything else you want to talk about? We've got Jerome Powell under investigation by the Justice Department. We've got more fallout from Venezuela. We have President Trump describing the USMCA as irrelevant, sent a little shiver down my spine when he said that, and plenty of other things too. Anything else you want to hit with the listeners before we say bye?
Well, I think you wanted to talk about Jay Powell, threat. I mean, you had, I believe there was a letter written or signed by all the central bank governors in the world in support.
Yeah, the lords of finance.
Yes, that was you. Yeah, you tweeted. See, my source of news is just my cousin Jacob. So like, I think it's interesting because the market didn't care. Let's be very, very frank. Nothing happened. Like the 10-year yield didn't go up. And I think that, even the dollar fell, but then has pretty much regained all the losses. So there was no market reaction to the US federal government threatening to imprison the central banker in charge of interest rate policy of the country. So let's just pause for a second and really digest that. I think that what the market is telling you is not that it's not afraid of this, but that it realizes that monetary policy is no longer really the key driver. And I would argue it hasn't been since 2017 and definitely since 2020. It's been fiscal policy and it's been politics. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you work in finance and you've been trained to read, articulate, and digest FOMC notes, you better be starting to learn some new skills because you're a dinosaur and you're no longer relevant. I think anybody who spends more than 50% of their day thinking about monetary policy is going to be without a job in the next 2 years. I mean, it just doesn't matter anymore. Who cares? The central bank sets short-term interest rates. Ooh, great. Who borrows at that end? Like banks do. Nah, fine, whatever. But like, I just don't think anybody cares anymore. Monetary policy is like profoundly in-depth knowledge of central banking and monetary policy, I think gives you absolutely no edge. And this week proves that.
Yeah, for these heads of central bank who came out in full solidarity with Chair Jerome, it was the ECB, the UK, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, South Korea, and Brazil. That's sort of the weird one in there. If you guys are trying to convince the median voter that there isn't a global cabal that is setting all of these economic instruments, this was maybe the wrong thing to do. Like, you're in solidarity with Jerome Powell. What does this have to do with what you guys are doing? This is a Federal Reserve chairman in the United States. It sort of broke my brain a little bit that there was this association, or that they thought it was a good idea, that it would help in any meaningful way to say this. I hear you what you say about monetary policy, and I agree with most of it. I mean, it's clear that what Trump wants monetary policy to be is to cut interest rates down to like zero. And if he was able to finagle a board that would do whatever he wanted, then I think monetary policy would matter. But I take your point. I mean, even with the threats against Jerome Powell, what the United States is setting with interest rates is not going to affect things that much, and we over-index on that as an arbiter.
But even in that scenario, then the origin, the seed of the interest rate move is in the White House, not in the
politics.
Right. So like, you want to study the seed, you want to study the origin. You don't want to like spend your time on reading the FOMC statements or thinking about what model they're using for the neutral rate. One thing that I will say to you, just we're both obviously biased. And we're biased because we come from a world where we didn't learn about monetary policy when we were 22. We kind of came into it late. But I will say, when I joined finance, in 2011, I remember in the first meetings at BCA Research, I was always very insecure because I did not study how monetary policy is crafted. And I had to kind of learn that on the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always very insecure because I would be in this meeting with legends of Wall Street, like sitting there listening to them talk about monetary policy and interest rate setting. And I thought, oh my God, I'm now going to see, the curtain will be revealed to me to see how we, figure out where interest rates go. And then I realized we read FOMC statements and basically do critical analysis like we would on a poetry of Milton. Effectively, and for those of you who are not in finance and you think there's some fancy schmancy modeling done to try to predict, no. Serious people managing your wealth with a fiduciary duty to make sure that they make you money, they sit down, read the FOMC notes as if it's a piece of literature, and then they critique it in a qualitative way. And so when I realized that that's what my colleagues were doing, I was like, holy shit, I can do this. I got 3 degrees in bullshit philosophy, baby. Like, I am more than qualified to read a bunch of nonsense. Like, are you kidding me? This is what it is. And so that's like, if we really draw back the curtain on finance in our industry, for the last 40 years, from 1980 to 2020, the reason it was so easy to be professionalized is because we assumed that these lords of finance are responding to some rules of the game, some Taylor rule. We even have names for these rules, like, where should the interest rates be given inflation and employment? And the reason that so many people in finance detest Trump, detest him at a core level, it's not because of Trump derangement syndrome, but because he threatens to make their skill set, which is based on the pretense that central banks are independent and are quantitatively driven and are like rules-based, he eviscerates it in such a profoundly callous way. He's so just brutal about it, I will imprison you because you overspent on drapes. Like, that's basically what he's saying. And that's not hurtful because of how callous it is towards Jay Powell, but because of how he treats monetary policy for what I believe it always has been, which is an extension of politics. So anyways, that's why this is profound and what's happening. And that's why, by the way, Jacob, I think those central bank governors wrote that letter in solidarity, because Trump's actions are going to make them irrelevant. And I believe will make half of all investors on the planet, like, basically, it will disarm them of the tools they've used to predict markets.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with almost everything you just said. I think that if you're trying to get up to speed either in geopolitics or economics, you would spend your time would be much better spent actually doing deep analysis of Milton
100%.
than of FOMC statements. You might actually learn
No,
something.
100%.
And also, just I mean, it's funny about the drapes because I mean, we've seen what President Trump is doing with the ballroom. And did you see the video of him? Like he's literally in a meeting with a bunch of generals, and he like walks to the window, and he's like, "Oh, this is beautiful. This is where the ballroom will be." Like just in the
Well,
middle
and
of a
I think
meeting, like the guy's just wandering around thinking about his
Jacob,
ballroom.
someone should actually make like a political cartoon of this because you and I just backed into like an obvious parallel here. Here's Jay Powell, a couple of years ago, decided to spend $2 billion on renovating the Fed building, which, by the way, like is just like a completely neutral nihilist observer. I do think it's quite ridiculous to spend $2 billion, but fine. And then there's President Trump doing the same. But the difference between them, in Kevin Spacey's famous saying, is the difference between me and you, Raymond, is I have all the men with guns. And so, yeah, President Trump gets to burn money in renovating the Eastern Ballroom. You, my resident nerd, who's unelected, do not. And I think that that's very mean to say. It's brutal to say, but it's also a punch in the face of every investor out there who reads FOMC minutes for a living. Like that, it's a source of nothing. It's a seed of nothing. It's reactionary. It's post facto, second derivative, third derivative, second order, third order. What matters is what happens in the hallways of real power. And central banks ceased to be truly the drivers of what happens in the world, I think in the 2010s, when they were.
Well, yeah, I think post 2008. I think this is the comeuppance. I
Mm.
mean, like this is the system that brought us to 2008, and you can lay a lot of the problems that brought President Trump to office at the feet of 2008. I mean, there was a chance there to actually impose real consequences for how the system went off the rails. And I mean, I remember it. Obama bailed them out. Would have been much more in keeping with his philosophy if he hadn't bailed out all those different companies coming after the '08 financial crisis. But easy to say that in 2026, sitting here in my cozy little chair.
I mean,
in
look,
Norway.
ironically, I am extremely sympathetic to central bank actions post 2008, which many of you probably don't think I am, given my rant against them right now. I actually think that pretty much central bankers saved civilization in 2010s. And I know I'll lose fans for that, but I just do. What else were we going to do? I think it's not so much that their actions in 2010. I mean, I know there's a big community in both finance and just amongst voters who think that they did the wrong thing in 2010s. I would say I'm not critical of central banks in terms of their decision making. I'm critical of the belief around the world, and particularly in the epistemic community of finance, that they are relevant. I think that they are second or third order analysis. So like,
Mhm.
and anyone who starts their global asset allocation with thinking about central banks, I just think will be completely made redundant because those decisions of which assets to buy or sell or countries to buy or sell, they're made somewhere else.
Yeah, to put a finer point on it, like everybody's clutching their pearls about the politicization of monetary policy. Cat's already out of the bag, guys. It's been politicized for quite some time. But welcome to the
Well,
red pill
and hell,
community.
everything's been politicized. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's the point. That's the point. The point is that what's been foreign policy has politicized. Geopolitics used to be a dirty word. Like a realm of conspiracy theorists and people like Kamran and me and you. And now it's in glossy PDFs of investment banks, which are creating geopolitical divisions. I mean, I studied for a PhD in political science at the University of Texas. In my 3 years at the University of Texas, I not once saw any of my professors ever use the word geopolitics. It was international relations. It was comparative politics. There's no discipline in political science called the study of geopolitics. The only professor with any cachet using the word freely was John Mersheimer. And he was on the sort of edges of what was acceptable. So I think that
Yeah, and was much more a realist. I mean,
yes,
our godfather George Friedman. I mean, Stratfor began as a Center for Geopolitical Studies at LSU, and that lasted for all of a couple of years before they had to get out of the academy and into the private sector because that was the only way they were going to survive.
absolutely. So I think that politics is coming back into everything, and I think that central banks are not going to avoid it. So yes, that's my take on this. My take on this is that the market didn't even blink because it doesn't care what happens to Jay Powell, and that's profound.
Yeah. Anything else, cousin, or should we leave
I think
it
we
there?
should leave it there. I mean, we did a mega one on Greenland. I think I mean, should we like beat that drum of Venezuela? I mean, it's a wait and see mode. I think Iran is clearly the most important geopolitical issue right now. I think you agree. We're going to be watching it quite closely, obviously. And yep, thanks for the time as always.
You know, yeah, the thing I'll just say is I don't know that it is. I find myself getting more and more skeptical, and I find that we are spending too little time thinking about China in the context of all this and what's happening in the Chinese economy. I think maybe that's where the center of gravity lies. But my point on Iran, you could probably hear it in the way I talk about it. I feel like I don't have any clue what's going on. I had very high conviction on Venezuela. I have high conviction on Greenland. I have no conviction on Iran. If you told me civil war happened tomorrow, I'd believe you. If you told me democratic revolution with the Shah coming back happened tomorrow, I'd also believe you. And if you told me it's 10,000 protesters dead and the supreme leaders burning Trump in effigy in Tehran, I would also believe that. Like all of those are realistic possibilities.
Oh, and by the way, one thing that you are focused on is Cuba. And
yes, I think it's coming.
And it is interesting that Trump has also pivoted to that, at least rhetorically, over the last couple of days as well. I mean, he's downshifting the involvement of the U.S. in Iran, and he's sent a couple of warnings to Cuba as well. And the Cuban regime is shaking its fist and sticking to its very aging and obsolete guns. And so I think you're right. I think that now from my very sort of brutally market-focused perspective, I don't know if that's going to really matter, but I think geopolitically it does matter. It is a huge thorn in the side of the U.S., and I think we're going to talk about Cuba a lot more this year. I mean, that's my agreement with you. Here it's January 15th. I mean, it's a lot more of the year left, but I think we're going to be revisiting your thesis on Cuba.
Yeah, and I think also revisiting Panama and about whether the U.S. will use the Panama Canal as a geopolitical lever as well. Because I think U.S. leverage over China has been much overstated. But if you really want to mess around with China, it's not getting rid of Maduro. It's not messing around with Cuba. It's, hey, we're going to block access to the Panama Canal for countries that don't do X, Y, and Z. Like now we're talking about like great power leverage, not the stuff about Greenland and about the kidnapped Maduro. So. All right. Until next time.